We are up in the bird's nest here at Oriole Park in Camden Yards. I'm Brendan Mortensen alongside Annie Klaff. Having a bit of technical difficulties because I'm trying to produce this and do the show at the same time. Annie, vamp for a minute.
All right, okay, so we have an emergency podcast that we've decided to co-host given the two huge trades that were announced yesterday, one of which being for Seranthony Domínguez and Cristian Pache for Austin Hays, and then the second one getting starting pitcher Zach Eflin for three Orioles prospects that were all drafted in 2023. It is just me as of right now as Brendan runs from the other studio fixing the live stream, but basically two huge trades. We've known over the last few weeks and months of the season that pitching was a challenge this season for the Orioles because of all the injuries hitting both the bullpen and the rotation. So that's what the Orioles have decided to maneuver in these two trades so far. And Brendan is back. I was starting to ramble a little bit, but I was just introducing the two trades.
Sure. Here we are. We're so back. This is the beauty of live podcasting, that the beginning sounds terrible, but now
Someone
it should be
too much
fine.
going on, and I would have to agree, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, I think we were talking over ourselves for a minute there, but you know what? We're here now.
We're back.
We did it. And we have two big Orioles trades to talk about. I assume you introed them a little bit already.
I did.
As the Orioles
As best
acquired Seranthony Domínguez and Cristian Pache from the Phillies in exchange for Austin Hays, and Zach Eflin from the Rays in exchange for Matthew Etzel, Jackson Baumeister, and Mac Horvath. Let's get into it.
All right.
There is a lot to break down here. Let's go chronologically. Okay. As the Orioles started yesterday with a surprising move, really surprising move in trading Austin Hays to the Phillies in exchange for Seranthony Domínguez and Cristian Pache. I want to start with Hays because anytime that you are a contending team, you don't really expect to move a significant part of your lineup. I understand that Austin Hays' role had diminished a bit this season, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute, but he was still a significant part of this team, a significant part of this clubhouse. You can say what you will about the start to his season and the struggles that he has had this year and what his role turned into, but he was on a roll for the past few months since coming back from injury, and he was still a very significant piece of this lineup against left-handed pitching. He was one of the better right-handed options that you had on this team. So to see a contending team move a piece like that is a surprise. And for Hays specifically, I mean, this was the top prospect in the Orioles system in 2018. He actually debuted in 2017 after having one of the better minor league seasons in Orioles history. He had been up in the big league since 2019, and he falls into the category of guys like Hays and Mullins and Anthony Santander, where they had been here through the process. They had survived a lot of the trades that Mike Elias and company had to go through with veterans when this team was rebuilding and you were trying to build up the farm system. Hays, Mullins, Santander, they had been here through the tough years at the beginning of this rebuild. They saw it through, I mean, not to the end, because obviously there's a big end goal that the Orioles haven't reached yet, but they saw it through to the winning years. And it felt really special to still have those guys on this team where they kind of fought through it all and saw the other side of it a little bit.
Yeah, losing Hays is definitely a big loss when it comes to sentimentality because he had played 557 games as an Oriole through 7 seasons, homegrown Oriole, like you said, and he did have probably his strongest season in 2021, and then this year falling off a little bit. So he is going to be missed completely in this clubhouse, both as a leader on and off the field. And you're right, against lefty pitchers this season, he was batting .328, had a homer, 7 RBIs, in 72 plate appearances. So that is definitely a big loss in terms of going up against lefty pitchers. But the good news is he is going to another really strong team, because you would hate to see a player like Hayes go to a team that isn't a contender, and he is, which is good. You like to see his journey still continuing.
Yeah, it's a tough situation this year in Baltimore for Austin Hayes. Obviously, he struggles pretty mightily at the beginning of the year. That was well documented, well talked about, and it lined up perfectly with a Colton Cower perfect storm, where Colton Cower looked like one of the best rookies and just one of the best outfielders flat out in baseball in April. So Colton Cower, who was thought of at the beginning of the season to be your fourth rotational outfielder behind your regular three of Santander, Mullins, and Hayes, all of a sudden becomes a guy that you need to have in the lineup more often than not. And that means somebody that was struggling, like Austin Hayes, takes a back seat. And that's hard for a veteran to do, especially one that started the All-Star game a year ago. This is not just a rotational outfielder who's been around the block here and there, and you don't mind that a rookie comes up and takes that spot. Austin Hayes is a good outfielder. This is an all-star from a season ago, somebody who clearly the Phillies believe has a role in their outfield and would have had a role in a lot of other outfields across baseball. But you're right, happy for Hayes where he goes to another contending team. He said it yesterday where, it's not often that you go from a team in first place to another team in first place at the trade deadline. These types of trades don't happen super often, but it's going to be looked at as a really nice stretch in Baltimore. Nearly 560 career games in an Orioles uniform, a 750 OPS, a baseball reference WAR of 9.5. Great defender, had really good stretches offensively when he was able to stay healthy and on the field. As you mentioned, a great clubhouse guy, too. Going to the clubhouse yesterday, it was clear that, talking to guys like Colton Cower and Jordan Westberg, the baseball implications were not really top of mind.
Yeah.
Because you lose somebody like Austin Hayes, who is a great veteran presence in that clubhouse, and a clubhouse that doesn't have a lot of veteran guys.
True.
That's significant. He was one of the older, more established players on this team. I say older, he's only 29 years old. It's not like this is, the older veteran that you typically think about in baseball, but with the Orioles, he was.
Yeah.
And he had been here for a while. So, we can talk about the baseball implications here in terms of what it means for the outfield, but none of those guys in the clubhouse were thinking about that. It's a business. It's a hard business sometimes, and I think this move ultimately makes the Orioles better for a few different reasons, but it's still a hard thing to lose a player like Hayes, who has been a significant part of this team and this community for the last bunch of years.
Yeah, and even the Phillies said yesterday that they've had their eye on Hayes for the last two trade deadlines. So it's nice to know that he's going to a team that really wants him and that he is going to be wanted. So I think that obviously it is a big miss in terms of in the clubhouse and defensively and offensively against lefties. But I am happy for him going on to another contending team. And one that does want him very much.
Yeah, so in terms of the baseball implications of not having Hayes, and we're going to get to the return in Seranthony, Domnguez, and Cristian Pache here in a minute, but if you wanted more playing time for Colton Cower and Heston Kjerstad, this is a way to organically do that. Mm-hmm. Colton Cower has morphed into a close to everyday player at this point, but against left-handed pitching, we saw Cower pretty often in center, which was a hard place for him to be with Austin Hayes in left. I think Cower's role isn't going to change too much. I think we're still going to see him in center field pretty often, but hopefully for Cower as well, he'll get some more opportunities against right-handed pitching in left field. But Heston Kjerstad gets the most significant boost here. Heston Kjerstad had been in and out of the lineup. He was kind of just platooning with Austin Hayes, where Kjerstad would be in against righties, Hayes would be in against lefties. Now Heston Kjerstad gets a chance to show that he should be an everyday outfielder as well, because Cedric Mullins, has struggled a bit this year. The Orioles want to keep putting him in positions to succeed, which at this point for Mullins seems like getting starts against right-handed pitching, as a pinch hitter, as a defensive replacement. Cedric Mullins at this point seems to be that kind of fourth rotational outfielder. I think Heston Kjerstad can be in that conversation as well, but as we've seen, at least, he's in the lineup today. He was in the lineup yesterday as well. I think Heston Kjerstad is going to get a chance here to be a pretty close to everyday outfielder.
Yeah, and both of them do bring more offensively than Hayes was this season. I mean, even just in the last 10 games, Heston was batting .318, had a home run, 4 RBIs, and 3 runs in 10 games. And then Cowser at the same time batting .375 in the last 10 games with 12 hits, 9 RBIs, 2 homers. And Cowser is playing extremely well lately. So I think that this is good news for both of them to be getting more at plate appearances offensively. And then obviously Kjerstad will kind of need to prove himself more out there in left field, filling the shoes for Austin Hayes. So we'll see how that goes in terms of what he can prove himself both offensively and defensively.
Yeah, I do think, as exciting as it is to potentially see Cowser and Kjerstad continuing to go into more of an everyday role, there are question marks here.
Yeah.
Heston Kjerstad's defense is a big one. This is a really hard left field at Camden Yards. We've seen him play it before. He had a tough play last night up against the wall. You're not used to running that far back anywhere in left field. So not the easiest play in the world. I know what the catch probability says, but this is a unique ballpark where you are running back that far. That's a unique situation. I'm curious to see how Heston Kjerstad does defensively. The book on him has never been that he's the best athlete in the world and best defensive outfielder, but if he's giving you a ton of offensive production, it shouldn't matter all that much if he is a downgrade defensively from Austin Hayes. If he is a pretty big upgrade offensively, which is certainly possible, then the defensive downgrade isn't going to matter all that much. And then I'm just curious to see what happens against lefties now.
Yeah.
Because you have now subtracted Austin Hayes, who was one of your better right-handed hitters in this lineup. You don't have that many just right-handed hitters. I mean, there's Jordan Westberg, there's Ryan Mountcastle, there's switch hitters in Adley Rutschman and Anthony Santander. There's not a right-handed hitting outfielder right now, unless you want to count Connor Norby as a utility type of guy, but Norby's getting mostly run at second base. He played outfield in AAA Norfolk. He played some left field there. Maybe he's an option. Jorge Mateo, once he comes back, could he get some more run in the outfield as well? Cristian Pache, is a right-handed hitting outfielder, but does not give you much offensively.
Yeah.
So what do they do against left-handed pitching? Are you fine with just putting Cowser and Kjerstad out there again as left-handed hitters with a switch hitter and Anthony Santander in right field? There's not really an option you can call up from AAA that's going to be a right-handed hitting outfielder. I don't think Kobe Mayo is going to be playing a corner outfield spot. So Kyle Stowers obviously a left-handed hitter, so there's not really a right-handed hitting outfield option. I don't think you necessarily need to trade for one, but that's just not really something you have anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely going to be a discussion that Elias and co. do have before Tuesday, the 6 p.m. trade deadline. But you're right. I mean, you are getting Pache in this trade deal, who is only hitting .229 against lefties versus how Hayes was hitting .328 against lefties. So you do lose that offensive production against lefty pitchers in this trade. But I think Pache, defensively, he's a really good defender. He's fast. So I think that it's a give and take here, a trade-off for sure. So in Pache, you are getting a lot probably better defensive production, but offensive against lefty pitchers, that's going to be a new discussion that the Orioles have.
Let's talk about the return.
All right.
A good thing to do in a trade. As you mentioned, you got to give something up to get something good. And Austin Hayes did give you a lot of good things, but the Orioles get 2 good pieces here. You mentioned Pache. Let's start with him. I think this makes a lot of sense for what the Orioles need. Mm-hmm. If you were looking to get more at-bats to Cowser and Kjerstad, then Austin Hayes was taking those away because Austin Hayes was almost too good to not be in the lineup. You had to put Austin Hayes in the lineup against left-handed pitching, without a doubt. Cristian Pache has better splits against left-handed pitching, but the OPS still sits at 662. Mm-hmm. So it's not like he is overwhelmingly got to be in the lineup against left-handed pitching. You can still go, and justifiably so, with Colton Cowser and Heston Kjerstad there to continue to get them more at-bats. But as you mentioned, Danny, his value comes defensively and with his speed. He brings 4 outs above average in center field. He's in the 91st percentile in arm strength. He can play all 3 outfield positions very well defensively. We saw him as a pinch runner yesterday, went first to third on a single. That's the kind of value that he is going to bring you. And it reminds me a little bit of when the Orioles claimed Jorge Mateo. This is Pache is a former top prospect who has just never really been able to figure things out with the bat, but he's an excellent athlete, plays great defense, and he's also under team control until 2027. He doesn't have any minor league options left, so you can't option him down to AAA Norfolk without trying to get him through waivers. I don't think Pache would pass through waivers because this is a solid piece, even though the offensive numbers aren't really there. But I think the role that he is going to fill is one that makes a lot of sense for the Orioles, where it's not taking at-bats away from your younger prospects in Kjerstad and Cowser, but it's also giving you a great defensive replacement, great speed on the base paths. It can be a solid, let's say Heston Kjerstad looks a little bit shaky in left field, but he's not going to have an at-bat in the 8th or 9th inning. You bring in Cristian Pache, and he gives you a really solid defender in left field there. So I think the role that we will see Pache in is one kind of similar to, an outfield version of Ramon Urias, where maybe he gets some occasional starts here and there against left-handed pitching. Obviously, Urias would give you the same thing as a right-handed hitting third baseman, but you're looking at defensive value, and Pache is going to pinch run more than somebody like Ramon Urias would. So that role for him makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think so far through this discussion, we've only made it to 2 of the 3 parts of the trade, but I like this deal so far. I mean, I think you are getting someone that is going to give Kjerstad and Cowser more at-bats. You have someone with a 91st percentile arm strength that, like you said, he's fast, good defensive replacement, and you're dealing Hayes, a guy that you care a lot about in this organization, to a team that you are almost giving him as much success as you can to another team. So I think so far this is a good deal on both sides. And then you get to the biggest need of the deal in Seranthony Domínguez. Yeah,
this was the prize of the trade for the Orioles. Seranthony Domínguez is a flamethrower. That is a live arm. Fastball and sinker are going to sit at 97, 98 miles an hour. His slider is also really good. Opponents have an expected batting average of 138. 4.62 ERA, if you're looking at Seranthony's numbers on the surface, don't look awesome. His expected ERA this year is a 3.25. So he is pitching a lot better than his ERA would indicate, whether that's a criticism of the defense behind him, whatever it may be. He is a better pitcher than a 4.62 ERA. He has a solid track record as well. Should be a high strikeout guy. He already is. He strikes out 10 batters per 9 innings. He doesn't get a ton of swing and miss. It's not a lot of whiff in his game right now. And I'm curious to see if the Orioles can unlock some more of that anywhere. I know the Orioles are a very analytically driven franchise. Obviously, Seranthony Domínguez could do better spin rate wise and, trying to keep the fastball a little bit more elevated where, it doesn't have great vertical movement, but it's got great velocity. I think there are things with Domínguez that you can unlock and push him further, because when Domínguez first entered the league, this looked like one of the most exciting bullpen arms in the game. And he is still a really, really solid option, but I think there's more you can get out of him as well.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that a reliever was a need for the Orioles come the trade deadline. And we saw him debut with the Orioles last night. He threw
crazy, by the way. They got in at Seranthony Domínguez and Cristian Pache got to Oriole Park at 5 o'clock yesterday, Brandon Hyde said.
And then they're in the game at 7. But he threw a scoreless inning, 2 hits, 1 strikeout. Overall, he has a 36% swing and miss rate on his slider, so that is a plus. But the biggest thing for me is his postseason experience. He's had 15 appearances in the postseason and a 1.13 ERA with that. You're also getting that with Pache, who has played 18 games of postseason experience, both with the Phillies and the Braves. So compared to Hayes, who only has 3 games of postseason experience, that is huge for the defense out there. But back to Domínguez, I think you're right. His strengths lie in his slider, 95th percentile fastball velocity, 90th percentile hard hit rate. So I really like this trade as a whole.
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense. As you mentioned, the Orioles needed a bullpen arm. And Seranthony is not necessarily a closing option. He can save games, but I think you're looking at him more so as a 7th, 8th inning, high leverage type of pitcher. I would be surprised if they try to push him into a closing role. This is also a potential rental, as he is a free agent after this season. You know, trading for a guy, there's always the possibility that, hey, he likes it here. We can, extend him long term if that's something you want to do, but it is possible that this is a rental. I think you could make a similar case to Austin Hayes. I know he has some more team control, but Austin Hayes probably did not have a long-term future with this team, given the fact that you had Cowser and Kjerstad here. There are more players in AAA that are going to be up here and ready to go here soon. Austin Hayes and his long-term future in Baltimore looked a little bit murky. So getting a bullpen arm, even if it is a rental, and then Pache, who's under team control through 2027, makes a lot of sense. Domnguez, I think, strengthens your bullpen a lot. We're going to get to it at kind of the end here with some general takeaways. I don't know if this means the Orioles are necessarily done in the bullpen or if they should be done in the bullpen. But let's get to the bigger trade from yesterday in terms of the quality of player that you're receiving. That's Zach Eflin. The Orioles acquire Eflin from the Tampa Bay Rays in interdivision trade for 3 prospects: Matthew Etzel, Jackson Baumeister, and Mac Horvath. Want to start with the prospects that the Orioles gave up. Matthew Etzel was not ranked in the Orioles top 30. I think if you were looking at an organizational level, he is certainly a prospect that would have been valued within their top 30, regardless of what prospect lists are saying. So with a 10th round pick out of Southern Miss a year ago, he's having a really great season. OPS over 800 on the year, already up to AA Bowie, hitting .290 with 41 steals. He can play anywhere in the outfield, a good first baseman. He's a big, powerful, left-handed bat. It's a good player. It's a good prospect. Jackson Baumeister. This was the highest drafted pitcher of the Mike Elias era. Really, really good stuff. I hate to say that this feels like the type of pitcher that the Rays organization is going to turn into a really good pitcher down the line, but the Orioles also got a really good pitcher in return.
Sure.
For Baumeister, it's the same sort of deal that we have seen in the Orioles organization, which is the stuff is outstanding. He can strike out a ton of guys. Needs to keep the ball in the strike zone. 11.5 Ks per 9, 5.5 walks per 9. He was just in high A Aberdeen, but the ERA was just over 3. A really, really promising starting pitcher. I'd probably put him around the 4th, 5th best prospect, pitching prospect in this Orioles system at the time of the trade. And then Mac Horvath. This was a 2nd round pick out of North Carolina last year. All of these guys coming from the 2023 draft class, which is a little bit strange. You lose 3 guys drafted in the top 10 rounds out of last year's draft. But Horvath was a 2nd round pick, Tar Heel, great athlete. Bat hasn't really come along a ton this season. The OPS is right around 750, but he's got some pop. 9 home runs, 19 doubles. And as I mentioned, great athlete, can play everywhere defensively, 26 stolen bases. These are all good prospects, but, when you're looking at the general takeaway here, you got in Zach Eflin, we're going to break him down in more depth here in a second, but you have a guy you were very comfortable with starting in the playoffs in Eflin. He is under team control next year, which is huge, and you did not give up a prospect named Holiday, Basayo, Mayo, Bradfield, Norby, Beavers, McDermott, Povich, or Johnson.
Yeah.
I know that giving up 3 good prospects hurts, and I think Horvath, Baumeister, Etzel all have great potential, and we wish them all the best in Tampa Bay's organization there. But you got a really good starting pitcher in Zach Eflin and didn't have to give up any of your top 8, 9, 10 prospects to do it.
Yeah, you took the words right out of what I was about to say. I'm just glad that this trade, for as strong of a pitcher that you're getting out of Zach Eflin, did not give up any of those big name prospects. And I saw on Twitter or X, on social media, whatever, that the Orioles got fleeced in this situation. But I don't think so, because if you had a Holiday or a Basayo or a Mayo in that deal, then sure, okay, maybe they could have gotten fleeced.
Yeah, if you had a top 15 prospect
Yes.
in baseball, sure, you probably got fleeced.
But with these three, yes, it's a dent in the Orioles farm system because they are three prospects that were taken all last year, and then one of which being the highest ever pitcher Elias has ever picked up. But I think that you should be happy with getting a pitcher in Eflin who has a 2.8% walk rate for those three guys.
Yeah.
And we've known that the Orioles need a starting pitcher in this rotation, or a number 3 come playoffs. So I think that this is a really good deal. You are going to probably lose Baumeister down the road with whatever, because he does have a lot of upside, and he probably will be formed into a really strong pitcher in the Rays. But you also take a look at where they've all fallen in the Rays farm system.
Yeah.
Etzel is 27th team ranked prospect in the Rays. Baumeister's now 13th, and Horvath is 18th. So that's kind of also a look at the difference between the Orioles farm system and then other teams' farm systems, because you have so many great prospects in the O's farm system, and you didn't deal away any of the top ones.
Yeah, and it's also a testament to what this player development staff is able to do and what the scouting department is able to do. This trade doesn't happen without your 10th round pick from a year ago. 10th round picks don't usually amount to much in Major League Baseball. A 10th round pick at that point, you're throwing a lot of darts. The MLB draft is a lot of dart throwing in general. But Matthew Etzel, I mean, kudos to the Orioles for evaluating and finding that type of talent in the 10th round. It's not like this was a random high schooler that went way over slot in the 10th round. No, this was a college guy. This was a well-established college bat that the Orioles identify and selected with their 10th round pick. He worked with the coaches in Aberdeen and Bowie and put together a really, really nice season. And this trade doesn't get done unless the Orioles could develop their 10th round pick into something that was a solid trade piece. Mm-hmm. I know Matt Horvath wasn't having the best season in the world, but that's still a solid second-round pick. Jackson Baumeister, a really good piece. As you mentioned, that's one that could hurt all three of these guys. That could turn into good players, could hurt down the line. But in Zach Eflin, you're getting a really good starter. I know it's a 4.09 ERA this season, but that's also a little bit inflated. It's a 3.37 expected ERA. So again, getting a little bit unlucky. Zach Eflin just seems like a reliable number 3 option. He is the prototypical, I know it's not a crafty lefty because he's a right-handed pitcher, but he's just a crafty kind of pitcher. The fastball is going to sit right around 93. He's going to put the ball on the ground a lot. The ground ball rate is going to be somewhere in probably the 45% range. He's consistently going to give you at least 5 innings. He's not going to have a ton of blow-up starts. Yeah, he's not going to strike everybody out, but as you mentioned, the walk rate is ridiculous. He has 19 starts and 13 walks. That's absurd.
Yeah.
And when you're looking down the line, it checks 2 boxes. We talked about this when we were trying to put together who the Orioles could be looking at starting pitching-wise at the deadline. The 2 major things we said were that, A, you really want somebody that you're comfortable giving the ball to in Game 3 of a playoff series. Dean Kramer, again, we know has the upside to potentially give you a good start in Game 3 of a playoff series. He started in the playoffs last year, but Zach Eflin is a more consistent starting pitcher at this point in time and is an upgrade at that spot there. So he checks that box as you feel really good about putting Zach Eflin out there in a playoff series. And the second box he checks is that he is also under contract for next season, where there are a lot of question marks. We know that Kyle Bradish, John Means, and Tyler Wells will miss a pretty significant chunk of the 2025 season. Corbin Burns, well documented, is a free agent after this season. Don't know what is going to happen with his future in Baltimore moving forward. So in Zach Eflin, you feel pretty good about him, even if he is your number 2 next year. If Corbin Burns goes elsewhere, if it's Grayson Rodriguez and Zach Eflin at the top of the rotation, Zach Eflin was the number 1 in Tampa. That's a good team that has Zach Eflin there as your de facto number 1 starter. He was the number 1 starter for them last year. He was 6th in AL Cy Young voting, led the American League with 16 wins. I know pitcher wins don't matter, but it was still a good season, a 3.50 ERA. And making $18 million next year, that's the going price for a number 2, number 3 type of starter. You are probably looking at the $20 to $25 million range contract-wise if you were to bring in somebody like Zach Eflin. If that's the Chris Bassett's, the Jameson Tyones of the world, where it's a number 2, number 3 starter with upside. That's the category Eflin is in. And so to have him on the books for $18 million next year, it's a good deal.
Yeah.
To have him in this rotation. So for me, he pretty clearly and with flying colors checks both of the boxes that I was looking for out of a starter at this deadline for the O's.
And might I add, a third box is not throwing away half of the top prospects that could have been dealt. You're not mortgaging the farm system at all with this deal. I mean, yes, those 3 prospects will hurt down the line, but again, it's not a Holiday, it's not a Basayo, it's not a Mayo, or even a big league contributor like Kauser or Kjerstad, which we've also heard thrown around. So that checks the third box for me, which is an important one as well. But I do want to go back to that walk rate because 2.8%, for context, the rest of the Orioles rotation, Burns has a 5.7%.
Which is still really good.
Yes. Rodriguez has a 7.1%, Kramer a 9.5%, and Suarez an 8.3%. He fits in there if you're just focusing on walk rate as the ace.
Sure.
Like, I mean, that's really his biggest selling point. So I think that, and you also do have the 4.09 ERA, but expected is 3.37. Last year he played very well, 3.50 ERA. So you could reach that stat again if you do follow that expected ERA. So with those 3 boxes on top of the walk rate, I think this is a great pickup. Yeah,
as mentioned before, when you look at the Orioles' top 30 right now, you still see the names Holiday, Basayo, Mayo, Bradfield, Norby, Beavers, McDermott, Povich, Johnson, and you got a really good starting pitcher without moving any of those players. I know the 3 prospects hurt, but Zach Eflin is a really good starter that makes this team better. And as you mentioned, he's not going to put people on with walks. It's not a lot of free passes. He's going to put the ball on the ground. This is a very athletic defense behind him. I know there have been some question marks with errors from guys that we are not typically seeing that from, but in general, it is a very athletic defense behind him, especially when Jorge Mateo is healthy, but Connor Norby has been looking awesome defensively at second base. So you've got, Norby, Mateo, Jackson Holiday is an excellent athlete at second base as well. Obviously Gunnar Henderson at shortstop, and then, Ramon Arias, maybe Kobe Mayo, Jordan Westberg at third base. It's a lot of good athletes in the infield. Yeah. And for Zach Eflin, who's going to try to put the ball on the ground half the time, I think he fits in very well here in terms of how he likes to pitch and the defense behind him that can support him.
Yeah, I think this is definitely, these 2 trades give you something to be excited about. You've checked not only those boxes, but you've checked the boxes of getting a reliever and a starting pitcher right now. And those were the biggest needs to make it to the postseason. It's the trade deadline we haven't even reached that yet.
Yeah,
so
still on Tuesday.
Who knows if they could be taking another reliever. I think you're set with the starting rotation as of now.
Yeah, I think as we're kind of getting to general takeaways here, the first biggest one is just that the Orioles got better yesterday. I know they gave up 3 prospects. I know Austin Hayes was great in the clubhouse and filled a really solid role for this team. But in Zach Eflin, Seranthony Domínguez, and Cristian Pache, I feel pretty confident that this team is better today than they were at this time yesterday. That's my first biggest takeaway. And with the starting rotation, I think you're right. I think the Orioles I don't know if they will be done in the starting rotation. I think there is a possibility that they could still look elsewhere. But when you're looking at this rotation right now, I think you have a really, really solid top 4.
Yeah.
In Corbin Burns, Grayson Rodriguez, Zach Eflin, and Dean Kramer.
Yeah.
That is a solid 4-man rotation. I know it's a 5-man rotation, but the top 4 feels pretty set. And then for me, with the 5th spot in the rotation, I feel pretty good about some rotation of Chase McDermott and Cade Povich, maybe some Albert Suarez thrown in there as well.
I want to see more McDermott, that's for sure.
Yeah, McDermott looked promising in his first outing. I know the numbers didn't look awesome. He had a tough inning where I think he threw 38 pitches in the fourth inning of his outing, but McDermott showed some solid flashes. Cade Povich showed some solid flashes as well. I'm not just totally dismissing the fifth starter spot, but Chase McDermott and Cade Povich are continuously showing that they are good enough to be up here in some capacity. They have put together really good numbers in AAA Norfolk. So I feel fine with some combination of Chase McDermott and Cade Povich being your number 5 starter. Now, again, as we mentioned for weeks leading up to this deadline, ideally, you don't really want Chase McDermott and Cade Povich starting a game in the playoffs come September. They don't need to be in that role. They can be your 5th starter. They can continue to develop here in the big leagues every 5th day. Whether it's McDermott or Povich, I think I feel pretty good about having one of those guys in there. That being said, it would also be fine if they were both in AAA Norfolk, continuing to get starts every 5th day if the Orioles felt like they needed to go out and get another starter. But as of right now, that bumps much further down on the priority list for me at this deadline. To the point where I think I would be surprised if the Orioles made another move for a starter.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, even when you look at Cade Povich's statistics, I mean, still in the 85th percentile of expected batting average, 84th percentile of hard hit rate, and 80th percentile for average exit velocity. So I do think that there are still really great underlying things for Povich. McDermott deserves some more time and chances to prove himself. But I agree. I think having that 5th spot in the air a little bit, but a solid 4 is something to be happy about going into the rest of the second half.
Yeah, I think when we're looking at Tuesday and the trade deadline and what the Orioles could still do, I would put another starting pitcher probably at 3rd in terms of a move that I think they could make. A sneaky number 2, I think, is a right-handed bat.
All right.
I don't think they will do it because I don't really see where a right-handed bat fits in, and I do think if they're gonna get a right-handed bat, it should probably be the one with like an 1100 OPS in AAA Norfolk right now. So if they want to add a right-handed bat, I think there's a good place to find one. There's a good place to find one internally without having to give up a bunch of prospects to get it. The biggest question mark for me remains, are they going to make another move in the bullpen?
Yeah.
Seranthony Domnguez shores up your bullpen in some ways, right? He is a good 7th, 8th inning high leverage guy. I think when you are looking down the stretch with a hopefully healthy Danny Coulombe, you feel really good about the options that you have in those high leverage spots. Cionel Perez has been working himself into that conversation as well as the type of guy that you can look to in the 6th, 7th, 8th high leverage spots and say, okay, we've got a guy there. I think Seranthony Domnguez works very well into that conversation. I am curious as to whether or not they will look for a closer.
Yeah.
Because Craig Kimbrell is doing the Craig Kimbrell thing where it's the hot and cold stretches. We talked about it when Craig Kimbrell was acquired. We did try to tell you on this podcast that this is a thing that Craig Kimbrell does, where he has really, really good stretches, and then there are a few games where you're going, huh? Because the command just isn't there in the way that we are accustomed to with Craig Kimbrell. He's got 6 earned runs in his last 4 games. It comes at a point in the season with the trade deadline just around the corner where a struggle like that is amplified. And there is a magnifying glass on a stretch like that when the Orioles have the opportunity to get another high leverage reliever. But also, let's not forget that in the 22 games before this stretch, he had 1 total earned run. And then before that 22 game stretch, it was the same thing. It was 6 games, 6 earned runs at the stretch of late April to early May. So Craig Kimbrell does this. He did it in Philly last year. It is a cold stretch for him right now. It is hard to find a closer that is not volatile. There are ones available that are out there. Guys like Tanner Scott. Mason Miller would be a really difficult pitcher to acquire. We talked about it a few days ago.
Even with the injury.
Right. We talked about it a few days ago. He's under team control until 2029. That's a hard guy to acquire.
Yeah.
I am curious to see whether or not the Orioles believe that they need to go out and address that kind of role. Craig Kimbrell has the track record, and I don't think that I am not shocked that Craig Kimbrel is going through stretches like this, because that is what we have seen him do in the past. And in general, he has still been this was a borderline all-star in the first half of the season. I know he is up towards the top of the league in blown saves. So is Clay Holmes in New York, and he was an all-star as well. It's hard to find reliable closers, especially on teams that are going to be selling at the deadline. You can find reliable closers. Oftentimes, they're on teams that are not selling. And then, of course, the question becomes, okay, if you do acquire somebody like Tanner Scott, what does Craig Kimbrel's role look like?
Yeah.
I don't really know. But I think at this point, Craig Kimbrel is in a bit of a cold stretch, as is a lot of the rest of the team right now. It is kind of a perfect storm of that over the last few weeks. So I'm not going to sit here and say the Orioles need to make a move for a closer. They need to do this. I think bullpen is still an area that could be addressed. Yeah,
100%. And I think along with those names that you mentioned, Tanner Scott would be a great pickup. I mean, I also want to throw, and I threw this in last week, but Kyle Finnegan, lots of experience in high leverage situations, pitching in the ninth inning, 28 saves. So I think that he could be an option as well, should the Orioles try and bring in another closer. Lefties only hit 134 against him. So I think that Finnegan could be a good fit for another closer. If you have Domnguez earlier on and then Finnegan closing it out, if you're not playing Kimbrel, I think that could be a good situation as well.
Yeah, it's funny because I think before the Seranthony Domnguez trade, it was easy to look at guys like Tanner Scott and things like that and go, oh yeah, like you just fit him in somewhere in a high leverage spot. Seranthony Domnguez is a high leverage reliever, should be a high leverage reliever. And he kind of clouds the conversation, but not really, because he doesn't close games. So what role is he going to be in? He strengthens the bullpen no matter what, but I am curious to see how the Orioles approach the next few days, because I think there are still places that they could address. But I think if you left this deadline with Eflin and Domnguez and Pache, you've still improved the team, but would you be leaving some meat on the bone? I don't know. It's a question that we will see over the next few days.
And that we could be answering on Tuesday.
Yeah, we are still going to be going live on Tuesday. Went live this morning to try to just give you some analysis here. Felt like those two trades were too significant to not talk about until Tuesday. So we will still be live for the trade deadline on Tuesday at 5:45?
Yeah,
I think we're going live with a Bird's Nest podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you for commenting along with us here live on YouTube and Facebook as Annie is piecing out, because we are two-man banding it here, I guess you could say, because we do not have a producer with a last-minute show. So thank you for bearing with us through some of our technical difficulties at the beginning of this show. We hope you have been enjoying all of our MASN Orioles content as this trade deadline approaches, and we are going to have more content for you. But Zach Eflin, Cristian Pache, and Seranthony Domnguez, your newest Orioles. We saw Seranthony and Cristian Pache yesterday. Excited to see Zach Eflin on the mound here for Baltimore at some point here soon. But if the Orioles make more moves, we will have you covered on all of our MASN Orioles social pages, on MASNsports.com, on the MASN app. And as mentioned, the Bird's Nest will be back on Tuesday with a live trade deadline show. We're going to be breaking down some of the biggest moves from around the league, around the AL East. If the Orioles make any more moves, we will be there to cover you with that as well. Big thank you to Annie Klaff for hosting this one with me, and also